Hey, everybody. Welcome to Hope Unabridged. I'm Angie Elkins.
And I'm Casey Brennan.
We are so happy you have joined us today. Our guest is Dr. Holly Catterton-Allen,
Yes.
and I'm excited to talk to her because she has a message about forming resilient children. And my goodness, if there's ever been a time we've been concerned about our children being resilient, it's now.
It's now.
Considering all they've been through in the last 2 years, year and a half, 2 years, she's an expert.
Yeah.
And so I'm thrilled to have an opportunity, for me personally.
Right. I want to know how to form
to talk to
resilient children.
About raising and forming resilient children. Like, what is my responsibility as the parent? And how can I be doing everything that I should do to help them bounce back?
Right.
Are you concerned about that with your kids at all?
I am. I mean, and even just like all of the extra anxiety and essentially trauma that kids have been going through the last year. And I think we haven't even seen the effects of that yet. So
it's going to be a while, I think. Yeah. Like, I even think about like a 5-year-old who's worn a mask for, 18 months of their life.
Or babies being born and all they see are eyes.
Right. Yeah. I think, not to scare everyone, but I think the repercussions of how it's affected our children emotionally is still to be known.
Right.
And we'll be discovering it for years. So I'm excited to talk to Dr. Allen about it. So Dr. Allen, welcome to Hope Unabridged.
Thank you, Angie. Thank you, Casey.
Yes, thank you for being here.
So one of the places I'd like to start this conversation is just about what does a lack of resilience actually look like? How can we know if that's missing in us or even in our children?
Generally, the resilience scholars would say not coping generally very well with what's going on, not doing well in school, exhibiting aggression or other violent behaviors, ways of socially mixing with other children or other people that's inappropriate, perhaps mental issues, depression, those kinds of things. Not functioning just generally very well in our usual norms of society.
So I guess as parents, we all want to do everything we can to keep our children from having to experience those kinds of things that you just described. And so having resilient children is high on the priority list. So I'm so glad you're here because you're an expert. And we just have a million questions for you about how we can, as parents, make sure we're doing our part to help our kids be resilient. So let's start right there with that question. Because of what we've been through in the last several months, what are some things that we can do to help our children bounce back?
This is can be a very holistic question, or it can be, more narrow, specific one. I think I would probably start with what I mean by children's spirituality. How do we want them? If we say spirituality is connected with resilience, then I want to talk about what spirituality is and then how it's connected to resilience along the way, saying what we can do. I would define children's spirituality as their capacity to have a relationship with themselves, with others, and with God.
Okay.
And it is considered one of the protective factors for children. In other words, it can be a buffer when traumatic or hard things happen. So how can we then nurture our children spiritually so that they can become more resilient? Right. And there are a lot of protective factors that do help children with resilience. This is just one. But one of the ways we can nurture children spiritually is to help them connect with themselves, know that they are I'm a me. I have feelings. My feelings count. I have needs and my needs are okay.
Yeah.
And then how to help our children relate with other people. We as parents know we've got to do this. That's why we have play dates and all that.
Right.
We want to nurture their relationship with other people. But first of all, connecting with your child on a very personal level. Reading a book and saying, who are you in this story? And then they eventually saying to you, who are you in this story? So that you're nurturing that relationship back and forth so they feel safe with you. That child-parent connection, that relationship is pretty foundational to everything else. And when it isn't there and it's not very strong, it can affect everything else. And then, of course, we have the child-God relationship.
Yeah.
How can we nurture that relationship so that this spiritual piece can be a resilience factor for our children? As we unpack some of the other questions, we'll get to that one as well.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. What are some of the protective factors that you just mentioned? How many are there? What are they?
Relationships are just about right at the top of almost everyone's list.
Okay.
There are dozens and dozens of resilience scholars, and they've been working on this for 30 and 40 and 50 years,
Wow.
ramped up in the last 20. But relationships are huge. How the child relates with parents. I mean, that parent-child relationship, as I just said, is important. You need capable parents. So capable parents are parents who listen to their children, who encourage their children, and who carry the weight of parenting in ordinary circumstances, and certainly bear the weight during dramatic or traumatic or adverse times, so that the child can rest in them, can model their lives after them. Now, in ordinary circumstances, like when you run out of gas or just getting shots, those kinds of things, just the demeanor of a parent and the presence of a parent can be really all a child needs. So when you run out of gas, it's not the end of the world. Oh no, we're going to die. But you say, okay, this will be our next step. We'll call someone. You have a plan. Seeing their parent manage those kind of ordinary little things that happen along the way can really help children. They need to see a capable parent managing life. And of course, not all children have capable parents managing life.
Well, can we just talk about that? Like capable parents, like some of us are thinking, am I a capable parent managing life?
Am I managing?
What exactly does that look like? Like, does it mean that we get everything right? Or like, I'd love for you to just kind of hone that in a little bit and maybe even let us off the hook and say, no, I'm sure you're fine.
Well, I think we generally have a good understanding what that is. Psychologists have been looking at good parenting for, decades. And one of the rubrics they use, to say, are you a neglectful parent? Are you too permissive? Are you too authoritarian? Or are you authoritative? And the authoritative parent is one who sets boundaries. The kids know it's the parents, they're in charge. The kids are not in charge. But they're also very nurturing, very loving, very encouraging. So you got to have a balance. That's that authoritative parent. And that's what we all seek to be. We've all seen a little bit too permissive parent. The child rules the world. If anything happens, it's like, what does our child want? We'll get it for them. And we've seen the authoritarian parent who sets the goal, sets the boundaries, sets the standards, but seems not to be warm and nurturing to their child. Both of those are quite damaging. And I think just staying out of those areas. I mean, once in a while, we're going to probably be a little too harsh and our boundaries are a little too strong. Once in a while. But if constantly that's happening, that's a problem. Or once in a while, we give in and say, okay, we're going to have cookies before dinner. Okay.
So a healthy balance.
It's okay. But if it's constant and all day, that's the problem. But yes, being perfectly consistent at all times is its own problem. There have to be exceptions to all the rules.
So like if I leave the laundry in the dryer more than a couple of days, that's fine. That's probably not that important. Okay.
You're fine.
Okay, good.
Man. Holly, I would love to get your take on how open we should be with our kids. Because you mentioned, being that parental figure, that parental strength in their life. And my daughter's 8 and she struggles with a lot of anxiety. And so I try to be pretty transparent about my own struggles with her, just so that she feels like she's not alone. But how far do we go with that? At what age? Like how open should we be with our kids?
Well, children are different, of course, and you can be very open with some and maybe less so with others. Our children, we have 3 children. They were different from the moment they were born. And our oldest kid had questions for everything, wanted to know everything about everything all the time. The second child, I would say, would you like to, talk about that? No. And he didn't want to, and he didn't like to. So reading your cues from your child is pretty important. By 8, they can begin to, see reality. And it's very important that we acknowledge what's going on. That middle child who was 8 at the time, we were traveling during the first Iraq war. We were in the London airport and he was seeing headlines that said, travelers warning, stay home, fears of travel during that time. Well, we were in the London airport, and so he was seeing these huge signs. And so when we got to our gate, and there were like 7 of us there, not too many people were traveling.
Yeah.
And he was very anxious, and he looked at me and said, "What will happen if they shoot down our plane?" And he was very intense, and I squatted down and I said, "It's very unlikely. At this point, the war is over there. It's not over here. This was in 1991. It's very unlikely." He said, "But what will happen if they shoot our plane down?" And I was straightforward. I said, "If they shoot our plane down, we will, all of us, be ushered into the presence of God together." He looked at me very intensely for another few seconds, and then his body began to relax. His face relaxed. And he said, "Okay." And then he reached into his pocket and got out some Legos and started. But I had to be truthful with him.
Yeah.
It's all going to be okay. It's all going to be okay. It's all going to be okay. But he wanted to know what would really happen. And I told him in as gentle a way as I could, balancing that place between hoping everything's okay and we're all going to die is, really hard.
It's hard. Yeah.
And COVID is a great example of ordinary kids just dealing with things they don't quite understand, younger children in particular.
I'd love to hear just a couple of examples of the child-God relationship.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
I would say one of the easiest, ordinary things you can do along the way is to say, you'd have to start this early for it to be easy with your children. It's harder to start when they're 11. But when they're young, where did you see God today? Where was God active today? I remember the first time I asked my grandson that, he said, "My sissy helped my little sister get out of her stroller." Now I said, "Oh, yeah, that's where you saw God." Well, I mean, he was acting in my sister because she doesn't usually do things like that.
Oh, that's so sweet.
He has
That
a
is
thing with
cute.
his sister,
Yeah.
So he was seeing God in that way. And of course, most children first will say the trees were really pretty. That's how they saw God today. And those are perfectly fine.
Yeah.
But eventually you can say where you saw God today. And someone lets you go in front of them at a light or whatever.
That's
that
a good
was
question.
God's working in that person.
I
They
love
begin to
that.
hear ordinary ways that God is at work in their world. That's probably just the easiest, most ordinary thing that brings God into our world on a regular, daily, ordinary basis.
Love that. That's beautiful.
I have a friend that if she's going through the drive-thru at McDonald's, for example, with her kids, and she'll say, "Do you think that God would like to say anything to the worker at the window today? Is there anything?" And so her kids, this makes me cry. They'll pull up to the window and her daughter will say, "God wants you to know how much he loves you today." And can you imagine?
That's just wonderful. That is wonderful.
Yeah, it's
That's
so
an easy
sweet.
way to witness to others who may or may not know God.
Yeah.
Just give a blessing. Ooh,
Yeah.
we love that. That blessing idea is pretty important too. Go ahead. You have a question.
No, I was just going to say, in your book, you dedicate an entire chapter to intergenerational church experiences. And I love this because I grew up in a bunch of different types of churches. My whole life, my parents, we went from all denominations everywhere. And it was all intergenerational and just that pouring in and the mentorship. Why do you feel that that's so important? And especially for the spiritual formation of our children?
I have two passions. One is children's spirituality. The second is bringing the generations together in our churches.
Love that.
And so I could speak an hour on this, but I chose two things to address that I think are terribly important about bringing in the generations together.
Yeah.
And one is, of course, that middle one, the child-others relationship. Oh my. All kinds of others around. So they not only get to see how you relate to God, but they will hear how other people relate to God. So that the spirituality as relationship with God is exhibited in their home can be expanded. It looks like this and it looks like this. You at your ages are right now already looking at people further ahead of you on the journey. What will it be like to be a grandparent? I'm looking at people right now who are retiring and saying, how do I still live out my God-given calling in my retirement years? I have friends whose parents are going into assisted care, and I'm thinking, what is that like?
Sure.
For them as they enter into a different season? But children are very aware of the sixth grader. When they're a first grader or second grader, sixth graders, set the standards. When they're a seventh grader, it's the seniors in high school.
Yeah.
But you're seeing what God looks like to them. You're hearing their stories. If you're in an intergenerational setting, if you're always with first graders, you'll hear first grade stories. But it's lovely to be hearing the stories of others who know God, who are sharing what God has been doing in their lives.
Yeah.
So that child others piece is just multiplying. Well, let me tell you one quick story about Jeanette. When I was a kid, Jeanette, who was the mother of one of the kids in the youth group, he was older than me, but I knew him because when he was a kid, all the kids hung out together. His mother had cancer. And she was the first person I knew who had cancer. And, she began coming to church with, scarves and hats. And her sister came from California to help care for her. Her sister had 2 teenage children and left them with her husband to come and care for her sister. And of course, that really touched me. And she stayed with her while she was losing her hair, losing weight, and losing her battle with cancer. 20 years ago, when my sister was diagnosed with cancer, terminal cancer, I was living in California. My sister was living in Florida. 4 times that semester, I flew from California and stayed a week with my sister. I mean, because I loved her, yes.
Yeah.
But because I had witnessed another pair of loving, devoted sisters. They had graced my childhood. And I remembered that. And I carried that forward. Those are the kinds of things that can happen and you can see and witness if you're with all the generations. If you're only with the children all the time, you don't even see those models or those people further down the line. So that's that child others piece. And then it's also the modeling piece. The other big piece is identity. Identity is very closely related with resilience. Children have a strong sense of who they are, tend to come through hard situations if they know they're a child of God. How we know who we are is hammered out in community. It's hammered out in our family. It's hammered out in our ethnicities and in our faith communities. When everyone around you says you are a child of God, God knows you by name, you are his child. You begin to see yourself as that. And that should, and eventually it will, become your first identity. And it can sustain you even if the other protective factors around you fall down and fail you in the hardest situations. I am a child of God. He is with me. He's accompanying me on this journey. It is a powerful thing that can be hammered out in an intergenerational community.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. It as you're saying that, it reminded me of my great-grandmother, who was really the influential person in my mom's life to kind of, share with her Christ. And I remember sitting she lived on a farm in Ohio. And I remember as a little kid sitting at her little bar area in the kitchen, and we would do lima beans, take them apart. And it was this whole practice that we did. And I did it more than once. It just made such an impression. But as we were doing that, she would just share Bible stories with me. And I remember those conversations, and I remember the acts, the action piece of the lima beans. And I remember how they tasted. There's just something so special about that. And that's intergenerational, and just that modeling. I love that.
Yes, it is. That's wonderful.
Yeah. It's so sweet. I wonder too, I think there might be some grandparents watching who are thinking, I really want to play a role in helping my grandchildren bounce back from all that we've experienced with COVID. What advice do you have for grandparents?
Well, I have several things that are really pretty wonderful. I had great grandparents as well. And I remember actually both of my grandmothers told me about the Spanish flu. They lived through the Spanish flu in 1919. They both knew whole families who had died.
Yeah.
And I didn't think to ask them as a child, were you afraid?
Right.
I didn't ask them that. But as they told me about it, they said what their families did. They lived on farms. And they said, we didn't go into town. Dad would go in about once a month and get what we needed, but nobody else went. But it was a very powerful memory for them. So they lived through that epidemic, and I think it was a pandemic. So I have those memories. I think telling your grandchildren your stories. That pandemic story has stayed with me. They lived through the Depression. They explained why they always took the zippers out of a dress before they threw it away, because they might need the zipper again. After I'd had about 30 zippers, I realized I'm never going to need an 18-inch chartreuse zipper in my life. I can probably throw this away. But their stories have stayed with me. So tell your stories. They love to hear those stories of when you fell off the wagon or whatever. I mean, I don't mean metaphorically. I mean literally when you fell off the wagon. They'd love to hear those stories from you. They will benefit from your blessing, literally speaking blessing over your children, grandchildren, parents too, but speaking words like, may you be strong and courageous like Joshua and like Daniel and like Esther and like Ruth. May the amazing grace of the Lord Jesus Christ and the extravagant love of God and the friendship of the Holy Spirit go with you today as you start first grade.
Yeah.
Those words, and they won't get them all, but eventually they will begin to expect some words like that. The Lord bless you and keep you. May he make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May he turn his countenance upon you and give you peace.
So good.
Those will be words that they associate
They'll
with
remember.
that warmth of relationship with grandparents. So speaking true words of literal blessing. They don't have to be words of scripture. They can just be, may God be with you today.
Yeah.
I'm praying over you today. I know who you are. I know you're a child of God, and bless you as you play with this new friend. Speaking words of blessing. I would say another thing that's just absolutely lovely for grandparents is to know that I think you can spoil your grandchildren. Stephen and Janet Bly defined spoil as giving people something they don't deserve. And they said, well, I mean, isn't that what God does all the time? Isn't that grace? Now, maybe parents can't do that very often, but grandparents can spoil their grandchildren upon occasion. And call it grace, call it what it is. I think those are very specific things that grandparents can do. Tell their stories, give blessings, spoil the grandchildren.
I love that.
Read those stories.
Angie and I were just talking about just like, this past year or the past 2 years and just the trauma and for all of these young children. And like, I'm a mom of young kids and just how a lot of them have been born into the world with masks and they're just seeing eyes. Like, what do we say to young parents who, like me, who don't know what to do and I feel overwhelmed? And, this is the age that we're in right now. That our kids are growing up with that trauma. What would you say to them?
They will take their cues from you. If you say, I can't believe we have to wear these stupid masks. I mean, it's really dumb. I mean, it's so annoying. That's what they will hear. And that's what they will lean into. If you say, these are important for now. This is what we're doing for now to keep each other safe. But you do know that there's a face under there, don't you? And one of the things that you can do with young children is say, I wonder what their mouth looks like. I bet they have a really sweet smile. So turning that mask into kind of a mystery. I wonder what their mouth is like. I bet they have a very wide mouth and a beautiful smile, or a little tiny rosebud mouth. Little children like those kinds of little hidden things. There's a hidden thing. Turn it into fun. They will hear that people are dying. And you can say, yes, there have been some people who died. And that's why we're doing these things, to keep safe. And you can always say, and God is with us. He will be with us even if we get sick. God is still here. He is at work in this world, bringing about his good purposes. This pandemic will not last your lifetime. It won't last my lifetime. It will be over probably before you go to school, like if they're 3. But I mean, time doesn't mean a lot to them. But this sense that this will not always be this way. If you say, I don't know, it could go on forever. We're just going to be like this. They're going to hear that panic, that craziness in your voice.
Right.
And if one time you get a little annoyed, it's going to be okay. They're not going to remember that is the only you they know. But they're going to take their cues from the tenor of the way you're leaning into God. You're trusting him. You're hoping. That trust, that hope that they hear from you will color their childhood. So leaning into your relationship, finding in you that deep place that says, I'm a child of God. I'm resting in the long, steady, loving gaze of God. And you say that to your child, I am resting long, steady, loving gaze of God. And he is looking at you with those same loving eyes. He sees you. He knows you. He knows you're worried today. Why don't we just go ahead and pray about little children take their cue, their emotional cue, their psychological cue, even their physical cue from you. They will do what you do. If you go, They will too. But if you say, well, here we go again, I can do it, they will too. Here we go again.
Here we go again.
I love that.
This has been so helpful and hopeful as well. Helpful and hopeful.
Mm-hmm.
And our show is called Hope Unabridged. And we would just love to ask you, we ask all of our guests as we wind up the show, where are you finding hope these days?
Well, in this season, I have been doing the Ignatian exercises and learning to rest in the long, steady, loving gaze of God.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a fixer kind of person. Give me a problem. I've got 10 solutions in 5 seconds. I have been learning now in this season that God does a pretty good job of that. He doesn't need me to run around and fix everything. I'm learning to trust in his ways, which includes waiting, discerning where he's at work, listening and watching for that. Mm-hmm. And I have much hope in his ability to sort things out. He doesn't actually need my help for that. He'll let me know if he does.
Yeah.
But I'm also finding great hope in my college students. I teach college students, and everywhere you read, 20-somethings are falling off the map. They're leaving churches in droves. And I'm thinking, well, they obviously didn't do their research here. I'm seeing lots of 20-somethings who love God with all their heart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they love others. They are very committed to helping others.
That's great.
The piece that I'm helping them with is recognizing that their self is also cherished and treasured by God.
Mm-hmm.
That's a piece of that spirituality part that they haven't learned as well. They have lots of things that have beat them down. I have much hope that God is using this new generation for his good purposes to carry on the church. You keep hearing, the church is going to die because there aren't any people to carry it on. That's not true. It's just not true. God has, by the way, been able to bring the church through 2,000 years. I think he will continue to do so.
That is
beautiful. Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. Thanks for joining us today on Hope Unabridged. We'd like to remind you, if you're watching us on Good Life 45, you can also listen to these episodes everywhere you listen to podcasts.
If you're listening and you would like to see the filmed version of this show or any of our other shows, check us out on Good Life 45 or on our YouTube channel and our app.
We hope that something you've heard today really blessed you, and we would love for you to share this show with those you love. Just hit that share button on your podcast app or on YouTube and send it to a friend. And we would also love it if you would leave us a review. With this program, we are finding hope in the unedited stories of our lives, and we want you to do the same.